Okay, so we have to find the first four non-zero terms of this Taylor series that we're going to find with this function and centered at a equals 0. So what I'd like to do is to first find all the derivatives. So we find all the derivatives, and then we have an easier time later on. So this is f to the fourth derivative, like this. Our first one is given, so when we don't take a derivative, then we have to apply the product rule in order to find the derivative. So that would be e to the x times x plus 1 if we factor out the e to the x. We apply the derivative again, and this would give us x plus 2. We apply the derivative again to this now, and that would give us x plus 3, e to the x, x plus 4. Okay, so you can check that for yourself if you don't believe me, but that's what you get when you do the product rule. Okay, now we plug in 0 because it's centered at 0. So we plug in 0 for all of these. F to the second derivative, we plug in 0. F to the third, we plug in 0. Even f to the fourth. And if we were to need to keep going, we would also just keep plugging 0 because that's where it's centered, right? So we find out what these terms are. This would be 0 times 1, which is 0. This would be 1 times 0 plus 1, which is 1. And this is 2, and this is 3. We can see the pattern, right? Because it's the same structure there. Okay, so now what actually is the formula for the nth term of the Taylor series? So the formula for the nth term is f of n minus 1 of 0, that's where we're centered, times x to the n minus 1 over n minus 1 factorial. And this may seem weird because we usually reserve having a power of this form, like n or n minus 1 or anything, right? Any exponent like this for variables. We apply it right here, and we're comfortable with that. But what happens when we apply it to f? Well, we're applying it here to f. It's not really a power. It's just indicating how many derivatives you've taken. So you should feel comfortable with that. Okay, so now we can do our first term. What is our first term? For our first term, we plug in 1. And I like to have n minus 1, as opposed to just n, because then we would have to plug in 0 for our first term. And then that's kind of weird. That's like arrays in Python, right? Where your first term is really a 0. And that's kind of a little less intuitive than just starting your first term at 1. So you plug in 1 for your first term. And that's going to give us this going to 0, which means we don't have a derivative being taken, right? So it's just f of x, which is really f of 0, right? Because we know we're doing 0. And x of 0 over 0 factorial. So this is 1, and this is 1, and we just are left with f of 0, which we found out was 0 back there. So that's why I like to do that first, because then we just know what it's going to be. Second term. Our second term we plug in 2, so that's going to be with our first derivative, and we have x to the 1, and we have 1 factorial. So this is x times f prime of 0. So that's 1 times x to the 1, which is just x. Our third term. Notice that we can see the pattern, like this is just, like we're just subtracting 1, right? So this is going to be x squared, and this is going to be 2 factorial. 2 factorial is 2. And the second derivative, we found out what that was. That's 2. So the 2's cancel out. This is x squared. That's our third term. Our fourth term is when we plug in 4. So we plug in 4, and we got f. This is the third derivative now. And this is x cubed. This is 3 factorial. What's 3 factorial? That's 3 times 2 times 1, which is 6. And this we found out, our third derivative, when we plug in 0 into the function, was 3. So this gives us 3 over 6, which is 1 over 2. So x cubed over 2. And we found our first 4 terms, but remember we were asked to find not just the first 4 terms, but the first 4 non-zero terms. Our first term was actually a 0, so we have to keep going. What's our 5th term? Luckily, we also found that early on. We found a 5th term. So we plug in 5 into this, and this is going to be f to the 4th derivative of 0, x to the 4 over 4 factorial. What's 4 factorial? That's 24, because that's 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, which is 12 times 2, which is 24, right? 24, and we found out what that was over there, so this is 4. That gives us 4 over 24, which is 1 over 6. So x to the 4th over 6 is our 5th term. We found our first 4 terms of this Taylor series, which are non-zero, centered at a equals 0 with this function.